Hathade, and welcome to I CHalan Mo'na, Navigating Guam's Political Status Options. Join us as we take a deep dive into decolonization and self-determination to explore the possibilities and challenges of each political status option available to the colonized people of Guam. This 30-minute informational program covers several topics found in the Self-Governance Study, a comprehensive study conducted by UN expert Dr. Carlisle Corbin, UOG professor Dr. Kenneth Goffigan Cooper, and economist Joe Bradley. The Self-Governance Study is intended to be a helpful resource to prepare the people of Guam for a vote on political status. This study is broken into two parts. Section 1, which assesses our current level of self-government in several key areas and highlights the deficiencies, and Section 2, which analyzes each of the three political status options available, the impacts each status would have on Guam, and the possibilities for Guam under each status. Section 2 also incorporates several case studies from other jurisdictions throughout the world to provide examples that Guam could potentially follow. I CHalan Mo'na is a small glimpse into the self-governance study, which can be accessed in its entirety at decol.guam.gov.
What is the United States' role as Guam's administering power in furthering Guam's quest for self-governance? How has the United States fulfilled this role?
The focus of concentration is on the obligation of the federal government under the United Nations Charter to prepare the territories for the full measure of self-government. And that's the stage that we are in. Now, I think it's important to note, however, that over time, we've been in the States for quite some time. And in fact, we coined the phrase preparatory in perpetuity almost, in the sense that we've been in this preparatory phase for a long time. And sometimes these things become sort of quasi-permanent, and it's difficult to really emerge from that, but also there is a feeling, of course, of comfort. There's a comfort zone in this context. Although there may be some clearly, and the assessment finds that there are clear democratic deficiencies, but these are very real, very easily identified in terms of political rights, economic rights, and the whole issue of unilateral authority is on the basis of this question. So the idea that it's preparatory is really the point, and then we can move it forward from there.
In your assessment of Guam's level of self-governance, you used an internationally recognized tool called the Self-Governance Indicators. Can you explain what the Self-Governance Indicators are and how they apply to Guam?
The indicators is a diagnostic tool that examines the political relationship between a territory and its administering power in a wide range of areas. Of course, political, economic, social areas in general. Other geostrategic areas, all of which are examined, and there's measurements from 1 to 4 which are applied with respect to the amount and the level of autonomy that a territory does in fact exercise in the context of that. There have been assessments in the Pacific. More recently, there was an assessment completed for Norfolk Island, which in their relationship with Australia. Prior to that, there was the assessment done for French Polynesia, which was utilized as the substantive document for the United Nations to justify the relisting of French Polynesia on the United Nations list of non-self-governing territories, which is one of 3 or 4 times in history when that relisting took place. So it was used for that purpose. It also is used for various examples in the Caribbean as well.
You've assessed 7 different aspects of Guam's self-governance in the study. Can you go over each one and explain how they got their ratings and what these ratings mean for Guam?
I believe the issue, of course, is the question of what it has impacted on that collective right, whether or not how it is exercised is consistent with the right, because it is in fact a right recognized in international law. The question is whether the applicability of federal laws and applicability of the U.S. Constitution in this context is inconsistent with that right. This is the overarching issue, the question of unilateral authority. Now, of course, one could argue that states are also governed in the same way, but the quid pro quo, if you will, is the fact that states have full political rights in the system, and territories have none. And I think one of the indicators later does deal with the question of participation in the political system. But the idea that territories do not have the same political power to effect what is applied to those territories. So that's a question of really a matter of the overarching issue of unilateral power, unilateral authority that exists. Well, I think it's important that in the preparatory phase that we're in, and other territories as well, you find that Guam has prepared, particularly in terms of the governance structures that are in place. So we have the three branches of government. There are the issues of separation of powers. You have all that. Of course, all of this is within the framework of the unilateral power of the federal government, and particularly under the territorial clause. But the structures internally have been prepared. So that to that degree, any change from what exists now to permanent status would be minimal in terms of the structures being transferred over. Now, one can have a few additional rights, incremental rights, which would effectively result in, forgive the double negative, lesser inequality. Okay, but there will never be full political equality as a territory. So these are things which indicate that the question of revenue generation and the revenue actually generated in the economy is far greater or significantly greater than we know. And this is something that I think could very well be seen as a boost in terms of the arrangement. But of course, under the territorial status, the territory cannot access that revenue. So if there's a change in status, then of course that revenue would be that of part of Guam's revenue base. Who owns the resources? Is it the country that administers the territory, or is it the people of the territory themselves? And in all cases, virtually all cases, you find that the resources are in fact owned by the people of the territories, and that's recognized. Now, in the case of Guam and the assessment, there's a clear difference of opinion regarding the federal position, whereby the federal position is that the EEZ is owned by the federal government, and the resources of the sea as well owned by the federal government. This is a directly contrary to what the resolutions actually say. So that is as a result of that, the level of autonomy in that area for Guam is low in the context of the measurement of the indicators. Certain areas that have been targeted for use for military purposes, certain activism has resulted in some changes in that respect. But in the end, I think it's in terms of the process, it is effectively a federal in the final analysis, a federal process. So that is it. And of course, the strategic nature of Guam in the context of other territories. The Northern Marianas is also linked with this as well now. So there's much discussion on that. But the idea, of course, is that again, it's done on a unilateral basis.
Section 2 of the Self-Governance Study, conducted by Dr. Kenneth Gofigan Cooper, analyzes each of the three political status options available for Guam: statehood, independence, and free association. Section 2 examines how each of these statuses would potentially affect various aspects of the local government and ultimately the people of Guam. Section 2 also explores the possibilities for Guam's growth and development, as well as challenges that may come with each status option. The section also looks at other places throughout the world to provide examples of what's possible for Guam. For example, as an unincorporated territory, Guam does not have control over its immigration. Section 2 of the self-governance study firstly explains how the island's current political status impacts its local immigration policies and practices, and then creates a forecast model of what immigration could look like in Guam under a different political status, based on how immigration works in other similar places. It is our hope that this part of the study provides you with information on each status option to help you make an informed decision in a vote on Guam's political status. The second section of the self-governance study was completed by Dr. Kenneth Goffigan Cooper, Mr. Joe Bradley, and their team of research assistants. Dr. Cooper is an assistant professor of political science, Chamorro Studies, and Micronesian Studies at the University of Guam. He holds a PhD in political science, specializing in international relations and indigenous politics. Mr. Joe Bradley is the chief economist for the Bank of Guam and served for 10 years on the board of directors of the Pacific Islands Development Bank. From 1989 to 2002, he was involved in Guam's Commonwealth discussions with the federal government and authored the first comprehensive economic study of Guam's political status options in 2000. Mr. Bradley holds a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in economics. The following interviews are meant to be an introduction and overview of the findings in the second section of the self-governance study.
Based on your findings, what are some of the shortcomings of our current political status, and how have those shortcomings affected the people of Guam? Why is decolonization and self-determination important for Guam?
Prior to this, right, with things like the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, territories were made to eventually become states. That was not the case with us. So this prompted a series of legal cases called the insular cases, in which created the status of unincorporated territory. And pretty much, we are not an integral part of the United States, but belong to them. We are foreign in a domestic sense, right? So that's our current status today. And this still exists in 2020, right? These legal cases happened in 1901, right? Started in 1901. And in 2020, these are still the cases that help dictate our political status today. We all feel closely related to the United States. We feel part of the United States, right? That's how we feel. Yet, in actuality, we don't get a meaningful participation in the greatest democracy on earth. We don't get meaningful participation in the country that we belong to, in the country that many of our brothers and sisters, parents, grandparents have died for. And this is a problem, right? Also, when you examine our political status, we can turn to the Organic Act, right? The government of Guam was created via the Organic Act, which in 1950, okay? Now, it's important to note that this was a federal legislation, okay? It was passed through the US Congress, it was signed by President Truman, and ultimately that dictated the parameters of our government. While there was advocacy and support from those in Guam and from friends in the United States that passed the Organic Act, we were not a part of drafting the legislation that has outlined the parameters of our own government. Another shortcoming I would say, and I know this is a controversial one for many people, but no matter how you feel about the military presence, it must be acknowledged that a shortcoming is that our governance has always been used in the service of US military interests, right? And this is because we're strategically located, right? 13 degrees north, 144 degrees east, our proximity to Asia, our proximity to Oceania. So this is very important real estate for the United States military. But we can see that even though there are consultation does not mean mutual consent. So we also need a status that will get us on a level playing ground with negotiations with the US military.
What are some of the challenges and benefits that come with a change in political status?
We have to acknowledge that a lot of our people don't want a change in status because we haven't done the necessary education campaign to let them know about what each status can bring. So number one would be further education, right? Number two is that decolonization is an absolutely complex process, right? Anyone that tries to tell you that gives you this romantic version of decolonization, that it will be this utopian project where everything is kumbaya, they're lying to you, right? Decolonization is a complex process that comes with its own set of difficulties, right? And we're gonna feel those difficulties, right? Particularly with the transition. You might feel it in your everyday lives. And so we have to acknowledge that this is not a perfect situation. Decolonization will not solve all of our problems, but it is definitely a vehicle for getting there. Third, I would say, one of the problems that we're seeing is what do we do now from this moment in 2020, right? With the Davis v. Guam ruling, what is the government of Guam? What are the next steps, right? Do we go to the International Court of Justice? Do we change our local legislation, right? So I think right now we can say it's a difficulty, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. So once these things get resolved or on the path to getting resolved, I think that can help push the decolonization cause further. Okay. Regards to benefits, despite all I said, I don't think that the fear of changing status should paralyze us into not changing status. And this is why it's important to understand that decolonization is not isolating yourself from the rest of the world. Decolonization is not a reversion to grass skirts or grass huts, right? Decolonization is not anti-American, right? Decolonization is an opportunity to get something better, but it requires that we understand and that we are willing to go through some of the difficulties in the process.
Decolonization is complex and can be achieved through different means. What are some things that we have to consider in Guam?
So what we're trying to communicate in the study is that when we think about decolonization, right, we have to also think about the geopolitical environment of the world around us, right? Who's the superpower? How is the United States positioned in the world, et cetera, right? And so there are 5 primary models of decolonization. Number 1 is that transfer of power model that I discussed. Number 2 is the national liberation model, right, which is how you saw a lot of the world decolonize via violent revolution. I don't think that's gonna happen here in Guam, but it was a model. Number 3 is the neocolonialism model, right, where colonizers realized they didn't actually have to annex or hold on to colonies to exert control over them. They could do it via multinational corporations, or they could do it via military basing networks. Number 4 is the unburdening model, when it becomes too expensive or too risky or not strategically important enough to hold on to a place. And the 5th is the world politics model, right, where giant geopolitical shifts in the world, such as what happened after World War II, such as what happened with 2 superpowers sort of engaging with each other during the Cold War, and how that dictates the conditions for decolonization, right? And we saw a lot of the world decolonize after World War II, right? And so those are different models. And the second part is we have to maybe look further, and when the vote, or however other method it comes, right, we have to realize that decolonization may also come to us whether we like it or not, right? Because of America's position in the world, okay? That's on the table, right? And these are uncomfortable conversations to have with the people who are very proud to be American, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it just needs to be on our monitor. When we are examining political status, we need to look to the world around us to see what's going on, right? And I think as long as we do that, we might be in a better place for choosing correctly.
Can you briefly discuss the various topics in the study? What can we expect to find in each topic?
So the governance section had 4 subsections that we were contracted to do. Number 1 is citizenship. Number 2 is constitution. Number 3 is legal individual rights, and then there's also legal judicial systems, right? So what we did is explore the possibilities of all those subsections under the 3 respective statuses of statehood, free association, and independence. So one of the main things is that we do live in a multicultural Guam, right? Chamorros are the indigenous peoples, but of course, there are other ethnic groups who live and exist here and call this place home, right? So all of these things, this is a social fabric that we have to deal with, right? And so in the social impact section, we address not only these aspects, but also things like immigration, education, and healthcare. In this part, we look around the world to see what people are doing in regards to green energy, aquaculture, agricultural development, food security, water resources, ocean resources, but then ultimately even things like human security and climate change.
How has our status as an unincorporated territory impacted our government and our economic growth?
Primarily, my focus in the political status issues is not on how it would benefit the government, but how it would benefit the people of Guam. Because after all, that's who we're really talking about. There are a lot of constraints on Guam's economy that are imposed upon us because we are a U.S. territory, U.S. flag territory. Some of those constraints are real and have a true effect. Others are really not that crucial to our economy. I think that probably the biggest constraint we face right now, or the one that's most prominent, is our lack of control over immigration with the temporary alien laborers that we bring in, the H-2B workers. It's an issue because our entire economy depends upon, our business cycle depends upon construction activity. And when there's money flowing into Guam, new investments, we don't have sufficient numbers of construction workers to handle all of the work that could be done. And about 2 years ago, it was determined that we're basically not eligible to bring in temporary alien laborers, whereas always previously we were. And I think that that's been a huge issue. Also, something that, in terms of our economic development, something people don't recognize about bringing in construction workers is that they're here to build buildings. And those buildings stay there when the workers have left, and there are new jobs in those buildings. So this outside investment, through a series of events, creates new jobs, improves our economy, raises standards of living, raises incomes.
Can you briefly discuss the economic impact section of the study? What can we expect to find in this section?
The economic section focuses primarily, as the title would say, on the economic provisions that are likely to come into play with a change in status. And I treat each topic in turn, giving a description of the current status, giving a description of some of the complications that we experience now with each of those economic parameters. And then I, in turn, go through, and this is what it's likely to be like under statehood, this is what it's likely to be like under free association, this is what it's likely to be like under independence. And then the next topic, and again, background, how do I say this? The current situation, the current conditions for each of these parameters, and then again, statehood, free association, independence.
One of the subtopics you cover is industry development. Can you briefly talk about what industry development might look like with a change in political status?
Tourism has been our primary private sector or civilian industry since really the first half of the 1970s, and it's had its ups and downs. Tourism, by its very nature, is a peculiar sort of product. It's an export, which brings in money so that we can pay for everything we import. But it's also a very fragile industry. It's what economists call a luxury good, which means as incomes go up in one of our source markets for tourists, their spending here will go up even further. But as incomes go down in those markets, their spending falls even further. It's kind of leveraged out. Our other primary industry is the export of defense services through the military. And that's been a primary industry here since 1946, I would say, and pretty much our only industry up through about 1963. And tourism didn't really get any kind of traction until 1967. We really need to find other sources of income. I think there are other industries that have some opportunities. We've legalized medical and recreational marijuana. The regulations on those are still pending, although my understanding is we're getting very close to having regulations in place. A lot of people are looking at that as being a major industry. Well, it's not going to be an export industry because most other countries refuse to import marijuana or other drugs of that type. And so it would mostly be a local market. Other industries that we could develop, telecommunications is often mentioned as a major prospect for Guam. And Guam does sit at a nexus of undersea fiber optic cables. And we do have the potential to, well, Guam is mostly used as a kind of a repeater station where the signal comes across on the fiber optics and we boost that signal before sending it on.
This also requires us to think about what our government will look like then. What will their priorities be? Because we can have this argument about dollar amounts all day, but we could have a government that wants to make the land more sustainable for future generations, and that may clash with basing agreements, right? We don't know, it's uncertain, but these are all possibilities on the table. A lot of it is predicated on the national interest of countries around the world. So as a geographically smaller nation that is very importantly strategic located, we could honestly be very good at the game, or we can be very bad at the game. And that's what the importance of starting now is. So with defense, we had 4 sections, right? Number 1 was relationship with the US military. We had basings, we had treaties, and mainly defense treaties, and then we also had military militia, right? And so I think this is one of the main concerns that many people in Guam have. Decolonization gives us a voice in 3 different ways because our voice now is a whisper. Decolonization, whether it be through statehood, free association, or independence, will allow us to roar, right? Will allow us to scream, will allow us to yell, allow us to be heard in a way that our whispers are barely just brushed off the shoulder of some bureaucrat in DC.
Sijulis Maasi for joining us and for taking another step toward resolving Guam's political status and building a future more equitable and more beneficial for the people of Guam. The preceding interviews merely scratch the surface of the wealth of information contained in the self-governance study. We invite you to take a deeper dive into the study by visiting our website at decol.guam.gov. Thank you for watching I CHalan Mo'na, Navigating Guam's Political Status Options. Biba Tautau Biba Guahan.